In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how much money you get paid in your first 4 years in the Air Force when you join as an E3. Now, if you're joining the Air Force as an E1 or an E2, I have a separate video that is specific to those situations, so click those videos. Now, I know a lot of people consider signing a 6-year contract because of the early promotions, and a lot of people probably want to know how much money does that actually equate to. So in this video, I'm going to be comparing if you sign a 4-year contract versus a 6-year contract, so you can see the actual monetary difference between the two. Just a heads up though, I am using the 2025 pay chart because that's what year it is right now as I'm shooting this. And I've also accounted for the average pay increase over the last 10 years, which comes out to 2.6%. But if you're new here, my name is Kyle Gott. I'm a 6-year Air Force veteran who did aircraft structural maintenance, and I'm also the founder of Airman Vision. Here at Airman Vision, we've created a streamlined solution for modern day Air Force recruiting where we're bridging the gap between future recruits and the Air Force. So if you're new, consider subscribing and also liking this video to help others find it. Now, in this video, I am only factoring in base pay. I am not factoring in other pays such as family separation, BAH, or BAS. The reason being is those situations can vary, and so certain people will get it, others won't. And at the end of the day, most of it just cancels out anyways, because if you get BAH, you're going to turn around and spend that on a house. And if you're not getting BAH, it's because the military is providing you free housing. Also, with food allowance, if you're getting free food, they don't give you BAS. And if you're getting BAS, you're going to turn around and spend that on food. I do have a separate video that breaks down how all of the pay works, but base pay is the same for everybody across the board. Overall, this video is to give you just a general idea. It's not going to be exact to the penny, but it will be very accurate as far as a generalized experience of what you can expect. And also, if you want to see a specific breakdown on how promotions work, whether you sign a 4 or 6-year contract and how long your technical training is, I have a separate video that deep dives into that information. Now, because I did use the 2025 pay charts to start this initial calculation, and then for every year pay raise, I factored in the 2.6% pay raise. But for future reference, if you're watching this in say 2028, hi people of the future, you're going to want to calculate this a little bit differently than what I have in this video. Now, I wouldn't expect you to go through and calculate every single month to figure that out, but if you just want to see what the 4-year total pay comes out to be, there's an easy equation that you can use to figure this out in the future. So you're going to want to take 1.026 to the power of whatever year it is right now while you're watching and subtract 2025 from it. And then you're going to multiply that number by the total 4-year total to give you your expected 4-year total for what you would experience. But before we jump into the charts, I do want to mention that at the end of this video, I'm going to be talking about how this year I've actually made less money than my first year in the Air Force. But this is also the second most I've ever traveled in a single year, and I've been able to maintain financial stability. It all ties back to how I used my pay and my time in the military to set a really strong financial foundation. And this is the information that I talk about in my book, Build Wealth in the Military. So if you've ever wondered how to turn your military pay into financial freedom, then you're definitely going to want to stick around to the end of the video. All right, let's jump into this chart that shows the breakdown pay between the 4-year enlistee and the 6-year enlistee when you're joining as an E3. I hate to break it to you, but there is no pay difference because you're joining as an E3. There really isn't any incentive to signing the 6-year contract because the early promotions only affects those that are joining as an E1 or an E2. So if you're joining as an E3, you've already done all of the hard work, earned that early promotion before you joined. Unfortunately, there is no other incentive. So the 4 and the 6-year enlistment are going to be exactly the same. But nevertheless, we can still talk about how much money you are going to make over those first 4 years that you're in and how the pay promotions work and how your yearly pay increases work as well. So this video is still useful for those of you that are joining as an E3. It's just not as comparative as the other videos have been so far. So in this instance, both Airman A and Airman B, the 4-year airman and the 6-year airman, they're going to go to basic training at the same time. For simplicity, I just started out with January. It's the first month of the year. Doesn't mean that everybody's joining in January. Obviously, people join all 12 months out of the year, but I wasn't going to make 12 different videos because realistically, I could just make one and then you can tweak it or apply it to how it fits you. So in this instance, we're having them join in January, and that is going to be the day one when they show up. Let's just say January 1st. Well, that just happens to coincide with their yearly yearly mark is going to be January 1st. And then the second year is going to be January 1st, and third year, January 1st, etc. So because these people are going to be promoting at the same time, no matter if you sign the 4 or 6 year contract when you are joining as an E3, the first pay raise that you are going to get is actually going to be at your 1 year mark. So as I said, both these people are going to join in January, and they are going to both be the same rank. So there's going to be no pay difference on this, and they're going to be promoting at the same cycles. So in this scenario, if they joined in January, at their 1 year mark is when they would actually get their first congressional pay raise, which happens January 1st of every year. It happens across the board. Over the last 10 years, it's averaged about 2.6%. Now, some years it could be 1%, some years it could be 4%. It just depends on whatever Congress deems that the military deserves for a yearly pay raise. So that goes into effect every single year, January 1st, though. So because in this situation they joined in January, this happens at their 1 year mark. However, if they would have joined in July, this would have happened at their 6-month mark. So essentially, these blue things, they just coincide with January. That's where that promotion happens. So this little pay bump right here, that actually, you would just scale that. If they joined in July, that pay bump would actually happen at their 6-month mark. And then it would happen again at their 18-month mark, because it would happen every single year in January. So they joined in July, January would be at 6 months, and then at 18 months, it would be January again, because that's 12 months later. I hope that makes sense to you. So the blue highlighted pay raises are not stationary. They fluctuate depending on when you join, but they will be every 12 months on January 1st. So in this situation, they're going to get a pay raise. I averaged it out again to 2.6%. So that goes from $2,733 up to $2,804. Then they're going to have to wait a whole nother year to get another pay raise, and that is going to come out to the 2-year mark. So in the Air Force, if you're an E3 and you have 2 years or more service, then you will actually get another pay bump. So when you go from a E3 with less than 2 years of service, you'll get a pay raise going to 2 years or more service. But also in this scenario, it just happened to coincide as well with the congressional pay raise on top of that. So they get a double pay bump in that month. However, say that you had joined in February, so your 2-year mark is actually February, and this is January, you would get your congressional pay raise right here at your 23-month mark, and then you would get your 2 years of service as an E3 pay bump at your 2-year mark. Again, the blue can shift. It always coincides with January. And again, this is the same across the board for the 4 or 6 year enlistee. And then at the 28-month mark is when both of these people will be promoted to E4. And so they will be going from $3,058 to $3,350 per month. And remember, this is base pay. This is not including housing allowance, food allowance, any other pay such as family separation, deployment pay, etc. This is only your base pay. And this is before taxes have been taken out or any other deductions. So getting promoted to E4 at 28 months, you will then stay in E4 for the rest of that year until you hit your 3-year mark. And then at this point, you will get not only that 3-year pay bump, but you will also get another congressional pay raise because it is January in this situation. But like I said, if you had joined in February, the congressional pay raise would have happened right here. And then you would have gotten that E4 with 3 years or more service. You would have gotten that additional little pay bump this month. So it still would have ended up being $3,623. It wouldn't change. There would just be a small jump right here between these two. And then there would be a small jump here that would equate to this same amount. So at this point, it wouldn't matter. You would still be making this same amount of money at this point. And that comes out to $3,623 at the 3-year mark for somebody that joins as an E3. And then they will be an E4 for the remainder of the contract. Now, in this scenario, there is an opportunity for you to potentially become an E5 before your 4-year contract ends. The cutoff is actually February 1st for testing for staff sergeant that following cycle. So if you put on E4 before February 1st, then you get to test that year for staff staff sergeant. Now, in this scenario, both of these people joining in January up here, that gets them to putting on E4 in May, and the cutoff was February. So they missed the cutoff. They promoted after the cutoff, which means that they are not able to test for E5 that summer, and they will have to wait until the entire next summer to test for staff sergeant. And then they will find out if they made it. And if they made it, they're making it fairly quickly at 3.5 years. And so then they would likely not put on staff sergeant until August or September of that next year, which would be after their 4-year mark. So I'm going to make a whole separate video that kind of breaks down getting promoted to E5 and all the different factors that come into play there, because there are several factors for a lot of different situations. For instance, joining as an E1, E2, or an E3. And if you sign a 4 or 6-year contract, it kind of fluctuates all of that. And it depends on what month you join. And that differs between the different ranks that you join at. So I'll make a whole separate video that kind of talks on that and how to get promoted to E5. But at the end of the day, realistically, you're only looking at the potential of a 1-year advancement over somebody else. And in this scenario, whether you sign a 4 or 6-year contract, joining as an E3, it doesn't matter because you're going to be in the same situation. The only other factor that would come into play here is getting below the zone, or BTZ, which I'm also going to make another video about because it's way too convoluted to get into in this video, and it would just make this video crazy long, and I want it to be a separate video because that's a lot of information as well. So we can pop down here at the bottom of this chart, and you are going to see that the difference total amount is $0. No surprise, because there was no difference the entire year. So every year there is no difference here, no extra monies. So the total that you're going to make, whether you sign a 4 or 6-year contract, if you're joining the Air Force as an E3, is $152,578. That comes out to an average annual pay of $38,144. Now, I know a lot of you might go, okay, 152, that's a lot of money. $38,000 a year, though, that's not really a lot of money. I hear you and I get it. However, remember that this does not factor in your housing allowance or the fact that you might not get housing allowance because your housing is paid for. Also, this does not factor in that you might be getting free food or they're giving you food allowance so you can buy your own food. Those two factors alone add in at least $15,000 to $20,000 in cost that you are not having to pay for because the military is paying for it for you. As a civilian, you would have to pay for your house and you would have to pay for your food. So if you add, say, $20,000 to this, that puts you at $58,000. That's a pretty decent amount of pay per year. Now, also factor in your housing allowance and your food allowance are not taxed. So your taxable amount of income is actually much lower than a civilian. So your take-home pay is actually much higher than a civilian. If they were also making $58,000, you are going to be walking home with a few $1,000s more than them every single year, just because the tax is factored in. And that $58,000 also doesn't account for that your healthcare is completely covered. So somebody that makes $58,000 in the civilian world has to then turn around and pay for healthcare. And then they have to pay copays and they have to pay for a bunch of medical stuff. In the military, it's all completely covered. You don't have to pay anything out of pocket. I cannot emphasize enough, being prior military for 6 years, being out of the military now for over 6 years, it is a huge difference. Thankfully, I'm covered by the VA. I do not have to pay for my medical. I've had a spinal surgery in my neck and that was completely covered. Didn't have to pay for it as a veteran. That is huge. The surgery alone was like 20 some thousand. I didn't have to pay a penny for it. My civilian friends have had to have surgeries on their hands or their arms or their back, and it is not cheap. Their premiums for their healthcare alone are insane, and then they have to pay copays and deductibles throughout the year. It is a freaking nightmare. So add in, if you're single, anywhere from $5,000 to $12,000 a year extra on top of that $58,000. That's putting you around $60,000 to $70,000 a year. And then if you have a family, that's even more. So yes, this annual pay seems a bit low, but this is not the whole picture. This is just your taxable income. This is it. This isn't including, like I said, the free healthcare that is provided for you, the housing and food allowance that is not taxed. All of that on top of that equates out to making roughly $70,000 a year as a civilian. So now that you know that you're going to make over $140,000 over the first 4 years of your contract in base pay alone, let's talk about how to build wealth in the military, which is more relevant now than ever. With the 2025 government shutdown, service members had to go weeks without pay and hope for back pay once Congress passed a spending bill. During that time, they had to live off of their emergency savings. And unfortunately, a lot of service members have not prepared themselves for a situation like this. And that's exactly what I wrote the book for. It's to teach you how to use your time before, during, and after the military to set yourself up for financial success. Because you need to be using the time when you do have guaranteed pay to prepare yourself for the times when you don't have guaranteed pay. Because let's be honest, life is messy and it will not wait for anybody to get their finances in order. It will just happen. For me personally, last year was actually the most amount of money I've ever made in a single year. This year is actually the least amount of money I've made since I joined the Air Force in 2013. But because I was able to go from $15,000 in debt when I initially joined the Air Force to a net worth of over six figures 6 years later, and then I continued to use that momentum to save and invest, especially when I had really good years, I've been able to set myself up to thrive even on a year when I'm not making a lot of money. This year alone, I have gone to school full-time at ASU. I moved from Nevada to Iowa. I went on a family cruise. I ran a half marathon. I finished my first triathlon. I've traveled to play in 4 hockey tournaments, and I've gone on at least a dozen other week-long trips. And I'm not even joking with you. I am going to be on a plane in 72 hours going to Italy. If you would have asked me 6 months ago if I'd be running 14 miles and finishing at the Coliseum, I'd have told you there's no absolute way that's possible. But here I am. This year has been wild. And that's what financial independence gives you. It gives you freedom. It gives you peace of mind. And most importantly, it gives you options. Money should be a tool that you wield strategically. It shouldn't be something that stresses you out your entire life. And that's exactly what I teach you to master in the book. This is the most impactful resource that Airman Vision offers, because no matter if you do 4 years or 20 years, heck, even if you don't even join the military, the information in this book is still useful. So I sincerely want to thank any of you that are still watching this video to this point. And so I want to offer you a 50% discount. You can use Italy as the discount code to get 50% off for the book when you check out. Now, if you found this video helpful, the best thing that you can do is just click the like button. It will help other people find this video, and also subscribe if you're interested in more content preparing you for the Air Force. And if you're interested, feel free to share this with anybody in your delayed entry program or anyone else that you know is joining. But as always, my name is Kyle Gott, and this is Airman Vision, where we're bridging the gap between future recruits and the Air Force, and we look forward to helping you in another video.